Putin launches the deadly Oreshnik. From now on, the missiles are in mass production. Russia is preparing attacks on Europe, and Poland is already hiding its art from the war. NATO is hesitating, while Ukrainians are calling on Belarusians, don't let Putin use you again. America has been shaken by anti-war protests. Russia is destroying the Ukrainian language in the occupied territories, and the armed forces of Ukraine have captured a millionaire from Novosibirsk. Greetings, my name is Katerina Pakhalchuk, and right now here are the main stories. But first, like this video if you support Ukraine, and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Oreshnik is great, we need more of it. I don't know who reported to Putin about the success of Oreshnik, but now the bunker dwarf wants his intercontinental toys to be put into mass production.
Special attention here will be given to our nuclear triad. So the strategic missile forces will be supplied with modern YARS systems, and the aviation component of the strategic nuclear forces will be reinforced this year with upgraded 260M missile carriers. In addition, serial production of the newest medium-range missile system Oreshnik, which has proven itself very well in combat conditions, is being launched.
Of course, Putin presented this brilliant decision with a source of threats, particularly directed at Europe. On the one hand, he says that all the horror stories about a possible Russian attack on European countries are nonsense, but still, it's better not to provoke Russia. Maybe this will come as a surprise to some, but even without the provocations mentioned by Putin, Russia will attack European countries. The only question is when and who will be next. This is once again confirmed by Ukrainian intelligence. In a report to President Zelensky, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirill Budanov, stated that Russia is preparing new operations in Europe.
We have evidence that they are preparing new military operations on European territory.
But it's not as if we've heard anything new. Although, of course, for some people, this is quite an unexpected piece of news. And what do you think, will Russia actually dare to cross the so-called red lines and strike at Europe? Meanwhile, the defense forces of Ukraine, together with Belarusian volunteers, have put up banners at the Domanyov and Horodyshe border checkpoints. The banners serve as a reminder that the Kremlin has repeatedly drawn Belarus into the war against Ukraine, using it as a staging ground for aggression.
These actions are an early warning about a possible new threat. The West 2025 exercises, which are planned under Russian leadership, could once again serve as a cover for the actual involvement of Belarusian forces in a war that is not theirs.
Ukrainians are calling on Belarusians to stay vigilant and not allow the regime to use them a second time. After all, just recently, Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky stated that the threat from Belarus cannot be ruled out. And it's also possible that Russia could launch an offensive against the Baltic countries from Belarus, for example, after the joint exercises in September. And what do you think, will Lukashenko lend Putin a helping hand for a second time? Share your thoughts in the comments. The threat from Russia is finally being taken more than seriously. NATO countries are now not only advising their citizens to stock up on food in case of a Russian invasion and developing plans to deploy troops if the Russians attack, but are even, attention, drawing up evacuation plans for works of art. I assume that they've already sorted out the evacuation plans for the population, or maybe their priorities are different. So it is Poland that is preparing to evacuate paintings and sculptures. They plan to remove cultural valuables from 160 institutions.
This involves creating a mechanism for transporting the most valuable exhibits from about 160 state institutions. Among the items that may be evacuated are paintings, sculptures, unique musical instruments, and rare books. Currently, the Polish authorities are negotiating with international partners about the temporary storage of these items abroad. Warsaw plans to finalize the plan by the end of the year.
Of course, Poles are skeptical about this idea, but in their defense, I have to say, Poland is seriously preparing its military. For example, they are increasing the size of their army and will raise defense spending to almost 5%. And by the way, about GDP, all NATO members are ready to increase their defense spending. We're talking about 5%. Interestingly, just a week ago, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was saying that in 2025, alliance member countries should reach the level of 2%.
All NATO alliance members will reach the 2% defense spending threshold, as agreed, by the year 2025 in a commitment to collective security.
But now the bar has been raised to more than double that. I assume that the growing threat from Russia pushed NATO to make this decision.
We cannot help but be concerned that a number of Western politicians continue to harbor plans to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. It seems that history teaches them nothing.
But the main thing here is not to be too late, because no matter how hard you try, the time for preparation is limited, since Russia has had its eyes on NATO countries for a long time. That's why even the leading publication Bloomberg writes that alliance members might not make it in time.
Time is running out. Europe is still moving at the overly bureaucratic peacetime pace, while the United States is starting to move backward. Both countries need to change. It is Putin who will decide what he will do and when. And the West's hesitation simply creates a window of opportunity for him to act, whether in Ukraine or beyond its borders. As Rupert Smith, retired British general and former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO's allied forces, said, "You fight with what you have in your hands on that day. Given the current trajectory of events, that may not be enough to deter the Kremlin from pursuing its great power ambitions."
And what do you think will NATO be able to thoroughly prepare for defense? The conflict between Iran and Israel is escalating. The United States is already supporting Tel Aviv not just in words but in action, having joined in the destruction of nuclear facilities in Iran. By the way, Ukraine has also supported them. President Zelensky praised Donald Trump's decisiveness.
Today, there were reports on the situation in the Middle East and the Gulf region following the American strikes on the nuclear program facilities of the Iranian regime that has helped Putin so much. Right now, there are new waves of shaheeds in the Ukrainian sky. We all remember very well where Russia got such weapons from. Iranian decisions to help Russia have brought massive destruction and significant human losses to our country and to many other countries. And this really must stop. And this really must not be escalated with nuclear weapons.
Israel itself also continues to strike Iran. The IDF reports attacks on as many as 6 Iranian airfields. Iran, of course, is not lagging behind and is attacking Israeli cities with ballistic missiles. And along with this, they're threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of oil supplies pass. The US, in turn, is warning Tehran against such a move and is even appealing to China to influence Iran.
If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it will be yet another terrible mistake. For them, it would be economic suicide.
I don't know how China is supposed to influence Iran, because it seems that if Tehran isn't listening, it's ready to coordinate its actions with Moscow, which is exactly where the Iranian foreign minister has just flown. Putin himself welcomed the Iranian guest. It's hard to predict what Iran and Russia will agree on, because much of it will be discussed behind closed doors. Publicly, however, Putin is promising military support to Iran.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Everything depends on what Iran needs. We have offered our mediation efforts. Specifically, we have stated our position. This is also a very important gesture and very important. Well, this is a kind of support for the Iranian side, and further everything will depend on what Iran needs right now.
There are no requests, as Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov claims. But if the Kremlin suddenly takes the initiative, it will be quite amusing if they offer to provide their S-400 air defense systems. Because Iran already said last year that these S-400s, to put it mildly, would not help them. And while some support U.S. intervention and praise Trump for striking Iran's nuclear facilities, anti-war protests have erupted in America itself because of this. Excuse me, guys, could I please have your attention for just a moment? There's something important I'd like to share with all of you, so if you could please listen up, I'd really appreciate it. Protesters took to the streets of New York, Washington, Chicago, and San Francisco to express their disagreement with the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The protesters chanted, "Stop the war against Iran," and "No to the U.S. and Israel war against Iran." We already know that Ukrainian is banned in the occupied territories. However, in schools, the occupiers have still allowed the study of the so-called native language and literature, but the music didn't play for long because even the remnants of the native language are being taken away. The Russian Ministry of Education has issued an order banning the study of Ukrainian in the occupied territories.
In 2023-2024, Ukrainian as a native language was studied only in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, while previously, according to parent statements, it was also studied in the so-called DNR, LNR, Crimea, and Bashkortostan. According to the existing program, Ukrainian as a native language is recommended to be studied for 736 hours, 260 hours in grades 1 through 4, 340 hours in grades 5 through 9, and 136 hours in grades 10 and 11. The draft order proposes to cancel the course entirely. The draft order also removes the course of Ukrainian literature as a native subject from the school curriculum for grades 1 through 9. The explanatory note to the document states that these changes are being made due to the changed geopolitical situation in the world.
But while Russia is terrorizing Ukrainian children, they don't spare their own much either, because in Russia, it's not just soldiers who are sent to visit children in schools, but rapists. According to Russian Telegram channels, a Wagner mercenary who was convicted of rape and murder is touring schools to teach safety lessons. You know, after 3 years of full-scale war, I've realized that Russian liberals are an absurdity. They don't exist, because all of them are imperialists, just latent ones. But sooner or later, it comes to the surface. As in the case of Yulia Latynina, it's been obvious for a long time that being against Putin doesn't mean she supports Ukraine or even anything reasonable. And now Latynina has once again confirmed her status by declaring that she is waiting for Russia to win. But that's not all, because Latynina considers Ukraine a threat to Russia's existence, comparing our country to the Palestinian entity in Israel.
Ukraine in its current form truly does represent specifically the regime that currently exists in Ukraine, and this particular ideology an extraordinary and significant historical challenge to the very existence of what is known as historical Russia. A neutral Ukraine, a multi-ethnic Ukraine, a Ukraine that remembers its Russian roots, and a Ukraine that remembers its Ukrainian roots that is something to be welcomed with open arms. Ukraine is a project called Hotspot from River to Sea, and it really does closely resemble the project Palestine from the river to the sea. And yes, it represents a strategic danger to Russia.
How interestingly veiled is Putin's rhetoric about the idea that Ukraine did not exist until Russia created it? I have no words. We've seen all kinds of people in Ukrainian captivity, satanists, fans of Olivier Saleh, those who seem to have been captured in Ukraine for the second time. But a millionaire among them was definitely something we did not expect to see. Meet Danil Klimov, born in 2004. This soldier of the armed forces of Ukraine was captured on the border of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. It turns out he voluntarily signed a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense to avoid punishment for financial fraud.
And how much did you earn?
Me specifically, well, maybe around 700 million rubles, 800. And what did I buy? I have an apartment which is registered to my mother, but it's mine. The rest is registered to distant relatives who don't even share my last name. I have my own car, a Mercedes. Well, just a regular Mercedes, an E200. That's it. The rest of the money is invested, some in crypto, some in gold, and some is just sitting in bank accounts.
In Russia, he ran a fraudulent call center for over 2 years, scamming money from his fellow citizens. When his accomplices were arrested, he realized things were getting dangerous and decided to enlist.
I started thinking about what it would be like to go to lawyers and all that. Well, someone suggested I sign a contract. They said you could pay money to hide out somewhere decent and so on. So I signed and ended up joining the formation of Regiment 1444 on November 12, 2024. They helped me out. They let me choose the position I wanted myself. Initially, I was enlisted as a rifleman in an assault platoon, just a regular assault trooper. But when I arrived at the formation, the chief of staff, while assigning positions, came up to me and asked which specific position I would like to take. They put a list in front of me. I pointed my finger at the position of radio operator.
I wonder when he'll be exchanged. Will he be imprisoned in Russia for the same financial schemes, or will they send him back to the front for a second round? Please like this video to support what we're doing and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss the next episodes. See you soon!